With me I have Avram Berg, who is the former head of the World Zionist Organization and also the former head of the Israeli Parliament. So thank you very much for joining us here on RT. Israel defines itself as a Jewish and democratic state. Does this definition hold, or is there a contradiction between the two?
Marketing-wise, it sounds fantastic. I mean, it's two at the price of one. I mean, not only it's a democracy, it's a Jewish democracy. And many people, maybe most of the people, are very satisfied with it because they don't really think about the built-in oxymoron or paradox, which means the source of authority of the democratic component is the human being. It's you and me and him and her. We are the source of authority of ourselves. Eventually, the source of authority of the Jewish component of the equation is the God in heaven. So it's actually a state which runs by two sources of authority, democracy and theocracy. This is impossible. This is a collision waits for its occurrence. And many times when you see internal conflicts within Israel between church and state, between Knesset and Beit HaKnesset, which is the synagogue, and the parliament, it's along this line. Is Israel a democracy, or is Israel a potential Jewish theocracy? So I think that this definition will not hold water for long.
In your recent article, Israel's Fading Democracy, you lament the state of Israel's democratic values. What are some of the most imminent dangers to Israel's democracy?
It's not an easy question to answer, because you see weaknesses in democracies all over the world. I mean, you see the eroded trust of people in their democratic elected institutions all over the West. So part of what happens to the Western democracies happens to Israel as well. And this is, the performance is not that good. The feeling of the individual that somehow they do not serve me, but they serve the elected, they serve their own purposes or goals or self-fulfillment missions or whatever it is, and it's not there for me. So this part of it, what happens to the entire West, is there. In Israel, I will say you have at least three more components. The first one is, we spoke earlier, and this is the inevitable collision between church and state. The second is, if you define Israel as a Jewish democratic state and the Jewish project takes over the democratic project, all of a sudden you realize that we have here an ethnical democracy. Can democracy be partial? Can you have just a splitted concept, or democracy is a kind of a universal, or should be a universal set of values, which is, of course, my fundamental belief. And the fact that in Israel we have more than 20% of the population who do not belong to the Jewish component, to the Jewish majority, creates a situation in which many Israelis believe that democracy is the rule of majority, rather than understanding that most of democracy is about the freedoms and the liberties of the minorities, or no less, the freedoms and liberties of the minorities. The third component, which erodes or threatens the very foundation of Israeli democracy, is the fact that we don't have a deep democratic heritage. There is a kind of model in political science which is saying immigrants who immigrated from liberal, progressive countries established liberal, progressive entities. Immigrants from Great Britain established New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and United States of America. And immigrants who immigrated from the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain, created the not very democratic banana republics of Latin America. So what is Israel according to this model? The overwhelming majority of Israelis are coming from a non-democratic background, be it the Muslim hemisphere, be it Holocaust survivors, be it people who immigrated from communist Russia, which was not the best of democracies ever, etc., etc., etc. So we do not yet have a deep legacy of democratic spirit, and whenever you have a threat, people withdraw to the old system, people withdraw to the devil they know. And the devil we knew is not a democratic devil.
Israeli identity is built on a claim of Jewish inheritance to the Promised Land. What kind of identity have Israeli leaders created for Israel in the past 64 years?
I will say that, at least from a Jewish point of view, which is the majority component here, It's the first time in our history that the combination of our identity is both territory, sovereignty, language, power, independence, and statehood. For the non-Jewish component in Israel, which is most of it are Israeli Palestinians, I would say that it's the first time for most of these people to live under Jewish sovereignty. No other nation ever lived under Jewish sovereignty because we never had sovereignty in the last 2,000 years or so. And the third component, which is no less important, this is my feeling is that most of the Israeli Palestinians, as much as they have problems and mistrust and were abused by the Israeli system, looking around, it's much worthy for them to fight for their position and improving their own status within this kind of Israeli boundaries rather than compete for the same rights within a pure Arab nation environment.
What role do Israel's Palestinian citizens play in the Jewish democratic equation?
From the point of view of many of them, they are the whipping boy of the system, whipping boys of the system. I mean, whenever something bad happens between Jews and Jews, they whip the Palestinian, the Israeli Palestinian. I mean, when Lieberman wants to make a campaign against somebody, he bashes the minority. When the Shas, the ultra-Orthodox Sephardi party, wants to progress itself, it goes against the Israeli Arabs, and there is a competition of let's limit them, or who limits them more. So I would say that in many, many cases, unfortunately, the Israeli Palestinians are the litmus paper to the quality and equality of the Israeli democracy. And recently, most of the tests coming out red.
What does the word Zionism mean to you?
For me, Zionism was a very interesting, maybe even crucial movement and a concept that was actually the scaffolding of the Jewish structures. It was a scaffolding newly erected by the end of the 19th century in order to transform or renew or rebuild the Jewish structure from an exilic structure into a sovereign one. In 48, the new structure is there, the building is built, the inauguration was done. We can remove the scaffolding, we don't need it anymore. I mean, as personally, I'm a human being, that's my family name. My middle name is that I'm Jewish, and my given name that I'm an Israeli.
How do you reconcile the law of return and the Palestinian refugees' cry for what they call the right to return to their lands?
Regardless of what will happen or should happen between Israel and Palestine, we should address the law of return. The law of return was maybe was a necessity at the early stages of the state, in which we still lived under the impression of Jews being persecuted because of the Judaism and the national belonging to the Jewish collective, which actually was there till the fall of the wall by the end of the 80s. So Israel, that part of it was a safe haven for Jews, needed a fast track for those who are running away for their life, because of their Jewishness. As for now, 98% of the Jews are living outside of the immediate threat for their life. I mean, there are 24,000 Jews in Iran, 4,000 Jews in Morocco, 2 Jews in Afghanistan who are not talking to each other, and that's it. The overwhelming majority of the Jews are living in the democratic hemisphere. So we should have a normal, equal to all law of citizenship, that maybe there should be there a paragraph that if one individual, you and me or my uncle or your auntie, is being persecuted because of the Judaism, they will have a kind of a fast track into citizenship to protect them. Otherwise, all the rest of them, normal procedure to join the Israeli collective. As for the right of return of the Palestinians, if there will be two-state solution, I have no problem with it. I mean, whatever they want to do in their country, welcome.
You have said that something profound and basic has changed in Israel's relationship with the United States. And you've also said that Netanyahu's great achievement was to make Israel a partisan issue. Do you think that Israel remains an asset to the United States, or has it become a liability?
The only answer I can give you is America still an asset for Israel? Because whether Israel is an asset for the US, you have to ask them, okay? Though I'm not at all sure if we shall continue with the kind of one-sided strategy of the Israeli government, siding with the harshest neocon American philosophies, be it the most difficult right-wing, merciless capitalist economy on one hand, and be very, very conservative vis-a-vis enemies and powers and fears and threats, etc., vis-a-vis some other stuff. Israel will not for long will be above the political debate in the United States of America. It will be an asset for the Republicans and a liability for the Democrats, and by the end of it will be totally removed from the American political equations. That's a severe strategic mistake led by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel should remain out and above any political nuance in America, partisan political nuance in America.
Avram Berg, thank you very much for joining us here on RT.
Pleasure.